Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Powerful Man Show. I'm your host, Doug Holt, with my co-host, Tim, the Powerful Man Matthews. Tim, how you doing, brother?
Doing very well. We've just had an hour-long conversation right on the last episode. So, I'm doing very well. I'm excited to dive into this, especially given it's very relevant right now, is this topic, especially with the men that I'm speaking with anyway. And obviously, we're live in the community right now as well. And I shared a little bit with them yesterday about the journey that a couple of men are on currently that is essentially leading to divorce for those guys. And I think should they have had this material or this knowledge a little bit earlier, things might have been different for them. You know, instead of going and counting the money because they are about to invest, $30,000 or whatever in divorce lawyers, which is, it's going to rack up to a lot more than that anyway. They could have had a very different path. So, I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you were talking about offline is, I guess you posted something in our Facebook group, right? I think there's 1,700 businessmen that are in that group. And I know we've had this conversation before, but you didn't get a lot of guys, it's just typical, actually commenting on the post, but a lot of guys sent you private messages about this, right? When you're talking about men, because you get on the phone with a lot of these guys. So men that are interested in the powerful man and interested in up-leveling their lives, after they go through a certain stage, they might get the opportunity to talk to you to make sure it's a good fit. And one of the subjects that comes up, right, is guys will say, well, do I really want to make this investment, right? Which is such a guy thing to do. All of us. It's kind of that typical thing where you tell your wife to budget, but then you don't, right? You're the one that you look at your budget, you're like, shit, I'm the biggest spender in the house going through. So I had, you got a lot of guys reaching out to you and talking to you about it privately because they didn't want, for whatever reason, to agreeing or disagreeing with you to post in the group. Which guys, those that are in the group, I encourage you to post openly, right? This is our space here for men. But Tim, I had an interesting conversation with a guy about this topic. Now, so this guy was on the verge of divorce, right? Successful guy, very logical. He was an investor, and he had a very logical tone. So he told me, he's like, Doug, what's the cost of the program? That wasn't the point of our getting together to have a conversation. He just asked me. So I told him, and he said, okay, let me think about this. And he started, talking out loud, which was really interesting, right? To hear his idea. He's okay, my house is roughly worth $950,000, right? That's what he told me. And he started talking about, it's like, okay, if I get a divorce, we're going to end up splitting that house, right away. So, she'll probably stay at the house because of the kids. And again, I'm listening to him talk this out. And where I thought it was really fascinating, Tim, is he started going, okay, and, all right, I love her, but, she's she's a bitch. And this is his words, not mine. So if she catches this, I won't say his name anyway. But he started going into it, and he goes, okay, from a logical perspective, my tax deductions for being married are actually better than what I'm costing this program, what this program would cost me. He's like, the truth is, if I could stay married just another year, right, and this program would help me just another year, then that would pay for itself just in tax deductions, which I thought was such an interesting and weird way to think about it, right? Because all countries, all over all Western countries, obviously, and I know this because I'm married, and other married guys will probably know it too, they give you tax incentives for being married, right? There's all kinds of ones like gift taxes, deductions. Your tax brackets are typically a lot lower if you're married because if you file jointly. I never thought about it this way, Tim. So I thought it was a really interesting way to think about it and the way this guy was processing it. And he went further than that, right? He listed out, I think of 4 or 5 different tax deductions that he gets just by being married. Now, I also want to make it clear that, in this particular instance, right, his wife was the one that was looking for divorce, but he was on the fence too. He didn't want, the relationship just wasn't working for them for whatever reason. So when he was looking at this, he was looking at this as an investment, right? It's very logical, very strategical, right? And like, is this possibly going to work for me? And if it does, am I going to get an ROI? That's all he was thinking about. Now, saving his marriage, yes. doing all the other things that we talk about, which is self-health, everything else that we teach the guys. But from a logical perspective, he looked at tax deductions alone, which I thought was really interesting. He then jumped into other ways that he would actually save more money, right? The house, right? We'd have to sell the house. It's a down market, right? And then we'd have to displace the children, then cost of lawyers, And so he started estimating things up, and he came up with a number well over $100,000 US dollars that he would have to spend on the divorce should it happen. And a lot of those expenses were annual expenses, meaning if he could even just from a logical standpoint, spend a little bit of money and put off his divorce for 1 year, is the way he was talking to me about this, that the ROI was like a 10x on the program. It was crazy, and he's breaking this all down for me. And as we're talking on the phone, I started to take little notes because I thought it was so fascinating the way this guy thinks, and going through it. And so what I told him at the end of this all, I said, look, we'll just call him Charles. That's not his name. I said, look, Charles, at the end of the day, you're your number one asset, right? You're the only thing, right? Investing in yourself, whether it's this program, whether it's something else, you're the only thing that people can't take away from you. They never can. I go, how did you get this education, right? Well, your investment education. This guy was wealthy. And he's like, well, Doug, I studied under so-and-so. I took these courses, got my Series 7, da-da-da. I go, was that investment in you worthwhile? Was that worth it? Oh, absolutely. He's like, I've been able to do this for my family, travel here, do this, buy this house. I have these rental properties. I have these vacation properties. And he started to list things off. Now, his whole attitude and energy changed as well, I should add, during this thing. But I think a lot of times as men, right, we forget what our number one asset is. We spend a lot of time looking at the markets, right? At least I do, and I'm sure I know you do, and a lot of the guys we know, of what's the best market. Should I get into gold? Should I get into silver? Should I hedge my bets here? Do mutual funds, stocks, real estate. We spend so much time thinking about the financial investments and the financial side of things, but we forget what our number one asset is.
It's kind of like the business owner that loses it all and regains it within like 12 months.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah, because the way in which he's invested in himself typically to harness a particular mindset and a particular skill set and a network around him, he's not starting again, although financially he may be. He definitely is not starting again. Whereas you have some guys that, kind of push and shove and struggle their way to, a certain level of success financially in business. And then they can either lose it all or COVID can happen and they struggle to recover because they don't really understand how they made it in the first place. It was really just by force. And, it's almost like one chooses to work hard and the other one chooses to work smart. The other one that chooses to work smart understands that he is his number one asset, right? So he chooses to invest into that because it's going to serve him and pay dividends for the rest of his life and almost bulletproof him from whatever happens around him, right? As the men we work with, they've often invested so much into their business, into the marketing systems or the sales systems or whatever it is, right? I know I did that for a long time. I didn't understand why it felt so difficult, like life, success, to achieve it. Why did it feel so hard? And then I realized that, so much of my money, energy and time was spent investing in the external, the things outside of me that I kind of had no control over to some degree. I mean, I did because I owned them, but at the same time, they kind of owned me as well. So I definitely wasn't working smart back then. Which then put me at risk, right? It put me in a very vulnerable position. It's kind of like building a house on sand. The more I tried to add to it, it kind of sunk. It never really built. Whereas when you actually, and it's a really powerful stance, and not one that many people take, to actually come from the place of a commitment that I am my number one asset, right? Because by default, a lot of the guys that come to us, they have been tolerating and putting their needs last so much in so many areas because they put business first, right? So they sacrifice their health, their relationship, their happiness for a paycheck often. And that's why no matter what they achieve, typically they never really end up any happier either. And that's not putting yourself as a number one asset. That's putting your business as the number one asset and sacrificing your needs. So it's very much the road less traveled, right? To actually say, do you know what? No, I am going to be my number one asset. I am going to commit in my own growth to level up and learn things and develop my network of people, develop my skill sets, my strategies, my mindsets, so that I can, wherever I go, because the reality is wherever you go, you take yourself with you, right? Imagine taking yourself as this asset that kept on increasing in value. We talk about the stock market outperforming many of the markets over 30 years, right? Always outperforms it. Well, what if you could outperform the stock market, by, the idea of investing in the stock market, whereas investing in yourself? Imagine the returns, the compounded returns that you could get year on year, decade on decade, from harnessing the mindset that you are going to really truly invest in yourself as your number one asset. And, the guys, quite frankly, that I was speaking with yesterday just didn't have that. Doesn't mean they're bad guys. They just hadn't arrived at that point, right? One guy was saying, well, Tim, I'm worried to make the financial investment in the program in case I end up getting divorced, because I'll then need that cash to put a down payment on a house and get a new car, because I'm not going to be able to live in the same location. And I'm thinking, well, dude, there's no commitment there. There's no commitment to the cause. And the reality is, you're not making an investment into the program. You're making an investment into yourself. And you're going to use some of the tools and the skill sets to become an even greater man and leader. And yeah, sure, the knock-on will be that, your wife will start to look at you like a king again, because you're treating yourself like a king, right? You're treating yourself like in a way that you admire yourself with respect and investing in your own growth. So for him, I believe that, he will end up getting divorced. And he says that he doesn't want it, but his actions and his mindset are very different. And the other guy, he was like, look, it makes total sense to me. He said something brilliant. He said, look, he's in the Air Force in the US, and he's an officer. And he said, look, Tim, I could become a one-stripe general. I could easily become that by playing it safe. But if I want to become a three-stripe general, the people that become three-stripe generals are the people that take the risks, the people that play and go out there on the edges. He said, Tim, in order for me to do that and also then improve my marriage, I've got to change my mindset. I've got to get a new frame of mind and invest in myself, which I loved because the penny was dropping, right? But then he went home, wanted to share it with his wife. His wife then obviously said, we need the money for the divorce lawyers. He then stepped away from the line and didn't invest in himself, didn't continue with the commitment that I am my number one asset. And if you're watching this, dude, look, I'm not jumping on you by any means. It's, if anything, hopefully this will give some perspective as to the importance of looking at yourself in that way. And the crazy thing as well about all this, guys, what advice would you give your son? Like, seriously, Bodhi, what would you tell him in terms of how to live his best life?
I think about this all the time, man. There's so much I would tell him. And investing in his growth and his education, no matter what that be, would be the number one thing I'd want him to do. I do it now with him, right? And, this reminds me of an exercise that we took some of the guys in the Brotherhood through. And, it parlays into this. So we have something we call the General's Tent that's in the Brotherhood, right? And this is where guys will get a journal, a notebook, and they'll do exercises. It's a very particular process, but I'm going to dumb it down a little bit here and just shorten it and abbreviate it. But one of the questions we posted for this week coming into it for the guys to really take some time with, and I'll ask you guys watching this now live in the community to write this in your comments. You listening to this on the podcast, I encourage you to go in the community and post it, but think about this. Push pause and really think about this for some time and then rejoin us. Answer this question. Where do I need to practice to improve my game and thus deserve the success I want. Now you can say success I want in my relationship, success I want in my business, or just success that you want, because you're not there yet, right? None of us are. There's always another comparative version of us that's a little bit higher. But where do you need to practice or improve your game? Like what skills do you get to learn, right? So you say you're at £1 million business or $1 million business, right? Annual revenue turnaround, whatever. And you want to get to 10 million. Okay. Easy numbers for me anyway, for math. What skills do you as a leader, as a business owner, what skills do you get to improve on, get to learn? Is it investment? Is it strategy? What are those things? Or maybe it's in the area of your marriage, right? What skills do you get to learn to be an awesome husband that your wife wants to admire and look at, right? Do you deserve that? First of all, right? And if you don't really deserve it, like what skills do you get to learn? What are those things, right? And then answer that question, write it down. Okay, in the next year, 2 years, I get to learn these things, right? Maybe business is an easy one, or relationships. Relationships is communication, right? We have the hidden motives technique, the clean slate method, right? Those are things that you want to live like the king, things that you want to add in there. You get to learn those, right? Your skills. Then how do you compress time? How do you actually compress time? If you are the number one asset, and you are, right? How do you actually compress time to make that happen? Right? What are those top 3 skills in your life you get to do? If you've always been focused on business and your marriage is crumbling, time to shift that focus, right? Because when your marriage is crumbling, business sucks. It just does, because it's always on your mind, right? And you're hiding in business, right? And vice versa. If business sucks, relationship could too. Maybe it's time to focus on business. But narrow it down to those 3 core skills that you feel are going to get you there, the 80-20 aspect of it, where the 20% of the skills and things to up your game, right? Do you get to learn, you personally, and how do you grow? And that's what I would tell my son, Tim, is really, what do you want to do? What is it your desire? And it could change, right? And maybe, my son is young, right? So it's going to be different. But if whatever he wants to do, then what do you get to do to get there? What are the skills? And get those skills, because nobody can take them away, man. People can take away your finances. Government can seize your property. All these things can happen, right? But nobody can take away your mindset or your skill set. And it's just an amazing thing to have.
I used to think I was really, embodying this philosophy as well when I used to read a lot. I used to think I'm doing all the right things. I'm driving from meeting to meeting, listening to audiobooks, working 15 hours a day. I'm doing all the right things. And, to give myself credit, back then, I was doing my best. I was trying my hardest, right? And it got me to a level, but then I couldn't get above that level, right? It got me to, at a certain point, and I just couldn't break through. I kept bouncing off this upper limit, right? At which point I then hired my first coach. It wasn't just an instant decision. It was scary. It was risky. And you know what, Doug, as well? A lot of the guys that come to us, I'd say 50% of them, typically they haven't ever invested in themselves in this way before, right? They are willing to take risks in business and invest in the business, but actually prioritizing themselves as their number one. And I get it, because I was there. I used to sacrifice myself too, big time. And this is why I think this is part of why I get so passionate about this and why we can speak into it so well. So anyway, I thought I was doing the right things. I'd listen to audiobooks, read books, and then made an investment to hire my first coach. Boom. What happened? Well, I immediately broke through the upper limit, because at that point, I then got perspective, right? A problem cannot be solved at the same level of thinking that created it, right? So if I wanted to solve any problem, be it in business or your relationship or whatever it is, and you're doing it on your own, chances are you're going to struggle, because you're going into it with the same mindset and the same level of thinking that got you into the problem in the first place. Even if you're reading things, you're still going to look at that book through the same lens that got you into the problem in the first place. So for me, broke through the upper limit by hiring my first coach, which went great. It was I think it was like $10K for the year for 12 months. So, compared to what I've invested in myself since, it was a super low investment for a year, $10K. So I broke through the upper limit, and by that point, I immediately felt my self-belief went up as soon as I made the investment. Prices went up in the business, attracted better clients, relationship became easier, everything leveled up. And then I hit the upper limit again, right? And I couldn't get above it. At which point, I invested in myself again. At which point, guess what happened? It went up again. And that's been the cycle. You go invest. It only does that, though, by actually having a commitment that you are going to be your number one asset. Because without that and without making those investments for the previous 10 years, I've acquired these skill sets. I've acquired this knowledge and also experience by working with these people and trying things and testing things and so forth. And the reality is, in order for you to walk through the door in an evening and have your wife look at you with admiration and excitement that you're home, and she actually wants to spend the evening with you and talk about your day, then you've got to be leveling up for your own sake. Because then you walk through the door with a certain level of charisma, a certain level of vitality, right? Because you're living in alignment with what you know you're capable of doing. So by default, it fills you up and that becomes contagious. Probably kind of like the man that she first met. But the thing is, as the years go by, she gets used to that man. So in order for that attraction to stay, the desire to stay strong, then of course you've got to keep on leveling up. So the mystery continues, right? You continue to be someone she respects. And bringing it back to the whole point of this, looking at it from a lens like these two guys yesterday of, I'm just not too sure if I can make the investment. What's the cost of this? Well, there's two conversations, right? Because the cost of not doing it is probably more in the hundreds of thousands over the years, right? As you continue to pay out. But like you said, I love that this guy figured out a way that he could literally get the program for free, right? Because if I just use these tools by leveling up and, understanding that I am my number one asset, if I just use them for a year, and prolong my marriage for just 1 year, and not only have I got the program for free, but I'm in profit by 90% as well. And maybe I save my marriage, right? And maybe, we discover things there. So it's huge to be able to willing to bet on yourself like that. I know he was taking a logical approach, but even still, in order to step over the line, you have to bet on yourself. Whereas these guys yesterday weren't willing to bet on themselves. So if they're not willing to bet on themselves, how can they expect the wife to be willing to bet on themselves, to bet on
100%. them? 100%. Yeah, I wish we had the ability to show an image on a podcast or a show. But when you talk about up leveling, right? And when you think of professional athletes, the story I've heard used time and time again is Tiger Woods. Old Tiger Woods, Tiger Woods before his wife threw golf clubs through the back of his car. But, Tiger Woods hired a coach, right? After he was one of the best golfers in the world, and his coach changed his golf swing. Like, what? And He actually started losing matches, right? He started losing them. And then he came in. And so this is what we call the dip, right? And what I want you guys to think about is imagine a line that's going up, right? Exponential line. If you look at the XYZ axis coming through, it's a line that's going up exponentially over the X and YZ axis. So almost like a 45-degree angle, right? Going up. But then that line plateaus. And this happens to all of us. Any skill, if you're learning the guitar, it could be relationships, eventually it plateaus for a little while. And, that plateau is stagnation. It doesn't feel good, right? And this could be happening in your relationship, could be happening in your business, and then what happens is it starts to dip, right? And that's where people freak out. And if you're up leveling, you say you get a coach, right now, I'm studying aggressively, right? Different subjects right now on finance and buying corporations, right? Buying big businesses. And so that's what I'm studying. So I have a coach that's helping me with that. And your knowledge level dips, right? Because the things that you thought were true weren't true. And so you go down, you get into a dip. That dip of hiring a coach also rocket ships up. So now, although you have a little bit of a dip in that learning curve, then you have exponential growth. It goes back to that 45-degree angle again. And so now your new normal, what was unachievable, impossible at one point, becomes your new standard. Now you're going to plateau again, and that's the next time to up level. But what happens for most of us, and this used to be me, Tim, is when I would go to plateau, and especially if I started to dip, I would freak out. This isn't working, this da-da. Because you forget where you were. One, you forget that you've risen that high. But you also forget that it's the journey, right? All I need is one tip, one thing to click for me, and I'm going to start that exponential growth again. And you keep up leveling. And so many guys get to a certain point and they're like, I don't want to invest the time, right? Time is my number one limiting resource. I don't want to invest the money, right? Capital, right? That's the second one. The one that I think is ridiculous that business owners argue about expense. I think that's when I hear that, I can almost tell exactly how their business is doing, right? Because as a business owner, I understand them saying, well, okay, is this time investment worth it? Right? I get that. The money, come on, right? You're learning skills and techniques. It's going to save your marriage. It's going to make you a better husband, a better businessman in all areas of your life. To me, that's just ridiculous. But it's the time. Okay, is this going to compress time for me? Am I going to learn a system or something that's going to help me? If that answer is yes, I jump all over it, over it. Right. And I get the best people. I'm working with the coach I'm working with is very well known and it's going to help me. And the guys, because I'm the number one asset, right? Even if I decide not to go after and become, a corporate raider, right? One of these guys that goes in and takes over corporations, I'm going to know how. And that knowledge is already applying to the Powerful Man movement and other things that I do and helping coach men better. And so it's taking that chance and realizing that I'm my number one asset, investing in my education, my growth, but also my time, right? Going for a run this morning, taking time out to meditate, doing the Alpha Rise and Shine, making sure that is happening and have the ability to do that each and every time and using the different tools and techniques like the General's Tent, right? And making sure that happens on a regular basis. That is something that I would teach my son to do and my daughter, quite frankly, and just to make sure that my children, they learn that at a very early age because it seems like that's the skill set of the rich, right? The super wealthy seem to know that very well. And for some reason, it's passed on our minds, just grind it out, get up early in the morning, work a little harder. Everything's going to be okay. Doesn't work.
No. And sorry to interrupt, but it just got me thinking, these guys who chose to, step away from the line yesterday. And again, I'm not in their shoes. I'm not going to pretend that, I understand their life and I know better than them. I'm not God. It's not up to me to tell them how to live their life, right? But one thing I'm pretty confident about is if these guys do get divorced and they choose to not invest in themselves, then the likelihood is the next relationship they get into, they're just going to meet the same problems again. So, which means that they either risk getting divorced again or choose to settle in a relationship so to avoid reaching the problems that they're experiencing now, or they choose to just be single and continue to cycle through relationships, which for me, I don't know about these guys, but for me, relationships is a really important thing for me in my life. A big part of my why and how I see myself is having a deeply rich and fulfilling experience with Amelia, sexually, emotionally, physically. It's really important to me. I know that if I was on my deathbed, let's say, and I was looking back on my life, and my relationships, my most intimate relationship was surface level and never really deeply touched me, and I felt quite, unfulfilled by that, I'd have massive regrets. And I'm just not willing to be in that position.
I agree 100%. And I hope you guys get something out of this, listening to this. I want you to go back to the exercise and make sure you do it. Gentlemen in the group, love to hear your comments. Tim and I will stay on for a little bit longer for those. And those listening to the podcast, if you want to learn more about this, go over to thealphareset.com. That's thealphareset.com. Tim, thank you as always. Gentlemen that are in live in the group, we'll see you there.